is Dave Hughes, as mentioned, CEO of HCC Embedded. And our topic is our SafeTCPIP stack, developed as a safety component, as a set of safety modules designed for use in functional safety type environments where you need that extra level of reliability to a network stack. I would just like to add a couple of specific things that are very relevant. As a company, we've always developed these software libraries for embedded. You could call them software elements out of context. When we develop these libraries, we don't know what they're going to be used in or how they're going to be used. So we have to design them in a quite general way to be reused in all sorts of different environments, maybe with a lot of RAM, small amount of RAM, 32-bit microcontroller, etc. So as we've progressed as a company over the years, we've been developing these elements out of context, these software libraries. We've been improving quality all the time. We've done ISO 9001, ISO 27001 to build a very strong quality-focused company. And of course, as an embedded development, your ideal goal is to take these components to the highest level of engineering, which to us really is being functionally safe. To be able to show that a module, software element out of context is really a safety element out of context. And this is the goal of our SafeTCPIP stack, is to realize this dream of creating the top level of software for use in any environment. So when I was preparing for this webinar yesterday, these days you get masses of emails telling you about this webinar and this presentation, etc., due to the current circumstances. And I got one yesterday that had the title, "Ensuring Functional Safe is Easy with Tool XXX." I won't mention the vendor as such. And when you're developing stuff for functional safety, these kind of things come as a bit of a shocker. They're quite annoying to somebody who spent a long time studying safety. This just isn't the way it is. You know, as an engineer, I've spent years studying coding standards, ISO 26262, IEC 61508, how to do testing, embedded testing, different types of development methodologies. You do a huge amount of study to become even an expert in embedded, and even claiming to be an expert in embedded is quite a difficult thing to do because it's such a broad range of things. So when someone comes along and says, it's easy with this tool, it's basically a static dynamic analysis tool of some kind, this is just not the way it is. Functional safety should never be considered easy. Functional safety requires a bunch of experts to diligently work on it. Functional safety cannot be assured by one tool. It requires a complete set of tools from the requirement specification of the product to the verification, test, and integration of the product. If you go back in time to some of the most famous software ever made is probably this space shuttle software that NASA developed, often regarded as the highest quality code ever developed. And that wasn't done by buying a single tool or a set of tools. It was done by having a team of very competent engineers working through very strict processes and doing their work very, very diligently. And that is the only way to achieve the highest levels of quality, is to have strict processes, very diligent people, very competent people working very hard on these things. And in the end, the estimates of how much that code cost, there were some estimates of like $100 US per line of code. That may be exaggerated, it may even be too low in today's standards. It doesn't really matter. The point is, developing functionally safe software is complex, needs experts, and needs to be taken all the way from the requirement specification through the integration of the product to show that it really is functionally safe. So we have a truism in English, which is, if it looks too good to be true, then it probably is too good to be true. And I think when you see these kind of things where people are focused on one particular aspect of functional safety, like static and dynamic analysis, it really is hiding the true engineering value of safety products, which are developed from concept through to integration in a very complete, formal way. So having had my little complain at how things are going on, I'm now going to give you some background to the problem we were faced with trying to produce a functionally safe TCPIP stack. We started off in the mid-2000s, the mid-noughties. We developed our MISRA TCPIP stack. It was a clean TCPIP stack, IPv4, IPv6, lots of components as per this diagram. One of the things you have to always consider, I mean, this is a complex set of components. Each module was individually, you can plug it in, you can take it out, you can build things mostly independently of each other. And obviously, one of the challenges of safety is you want to have simplicity. You want to not have things in there that aren't needed, because that's something that needs to be tested or verified or could interfere with the functionality. With every safety project, you really need to be focused on just delivering what is required and making sure that it does what is required. These are kind of the holy grail of safety. It's keeping it simple and to the point and making sure it's concise. So starting with this huge block of different components, which we still expand on and grow all the time as different requirements come along, it's quite a challenge. And this is what we were faced with the SafeTCPIP stack. So then when we move on to safety, the next thing to consider is how you actually do a safety development. There are lots of different safety standards that are all verticalized. So in aerospace, you've got DO178C. In automotive, you've got ISO 26262. Medical, 62304. Functional, industrial functional safety, 61508, etc., etc. These go on. And then there's supporting standards like AutoSpice, coding standards, etc. And the strange thing is, the difficult thing to deal with is that these standards are verticalized. In other words, they're different for aerospace, from automotive to nuclear to trains. They all have their own standards for doing these things. But in the end, if you've got a component like a microcontroller that goes into a car or a train, or a piece of software that's reused, these are not vertical components. These components have a very general piece of functionality. But the key thing about safety software development, it pretty always has to conform to some kind of V model. It might not be an explicit V model, but in the end, you're going to have to realize something that looks like this. From the left side of it, as you go forward, you start with the project definition in detail, specifying it, expanding that into a detailed design and implementation, and then going through validation steps that match to each level all the way back until you've integrated it into your product. There are different ways of realizing this. Sometimes you can do it iteratively, sometimes you always do it from left to right. It's really up to the particular development, but in the end, you need something like this at the base of it. And if you study 2626262 or 61508, you have a V model at the bottom of these things. So starting from this premise, we've researched many of the standards. And the one that we came down to as the best working reference for building a reusable software component was ISO 26262, the automotive standard for building a vehicle. And it specifies how to build what they call SAIL, safety elements out of context. These may be hardware, like a microcontroller or resistor, some component you put into a car that wasn't designed originally for a car, or it could be pieces of software, and that's what we call a software SAIL. Software safety element out of context. And the specification really defines very well how you build up the safety element out of context, how you assess its suitability for use in that particular vehicle, how you integrate it, and how you verify its integration. And so 26262 was a development on from 61508. And to us, it's a really good starting point that makes it relatively easy. I hate to use the word easy in safety ever, but it makes it relatively easy to then use that in another environment like DO178C or 62304, because all the elements you can consider for a software component are included within this standard. This diagram here is a summary taking out of the vast set of documents that is 26262, just those components that are specific to creating a software SAIL for ISO 26262. And for the rest of this, I'm going to kind of go into some of the details at a high level of what's required to create this component and what makes it useful to integrate to a safety development process. So one of the key parts of the SAOC specification is what assumptions you're going to have to make of the system. I'm going to quote directly from the 26262 specification and then explain it a little. Development of the safety element out of context shall be based on a requirement specification that is derived from assumptions on an intended use and context, including its internal interfaces. So there's two sets of assumptions we have to make. The first set of assumptions is what our element out of context is going to do. Is it going to send TCP packets, receive TCP packets, etc.? The other set of assumptions we have to make is the environment it's going to be used in. Will it have an RTOS supporting it? Will it be a 32-bit processor or a 64-bit processor? Will it be big endian, little endian? All the environment assumptions you make of its usage have to be combined. And so we combine the assumed requirements with the assumed design external to the SAOC, maybe the CPU, maybe the endianness, maybe the compiler, who knows? And you combine those into the SAOC requirements that then allow you to then implement a B model to completely implement your particular safety element out of context. In our case, this is the development of the SafeTCPIP stack, for which here we show a simple B model. But needless to say, nothing is quite that simple when you're building something as complicated as a TCPIP stack and you want to make it scalable. So just looking from a high level at our SafeTCPIP stack, the core components are a sockets interface, UDP, TCP, IP, ICMP, IGMP, and a network adapter there. And supporting that, we need an OS abstraction so we can talk to an RTOS, some form of timer to time things out, and some kind of memory pool that needs to be provided, hopefully with some independence, freedom from interference from other parts of the system. So all these components need to be included in the most basic stack, except you might want to exclude something like, for a particular implementation, you might want just UDP, no TCP, or you might want TCP and not UDP. Maybe you don't want a sockets interface. It's always difficult to know what's the requirements of the design are going to be. And for that reason, what we have is each one of the components that goes into this has its own V model, so we can piece these together independently from each other. So the overall model for developing SafeTCP is, from a high level, we have our functional safety project plan and our very high level requirements and our architecture design, and we validate all that. And then within that, we have a whole another set of modules. One for TCP, one for UDP, one for sockets, one for IPv4, etc. And each of these is individually implemented, tested, and then can be integrated, and the system tests allow you to integrate and test the integrated components. For each of these, you then go into, you do an architectural design, and 262 has a great summary of the basic architectural, high-level architectural design requirements of software: comprehensibility, consistency, simplicity, verifiability, modularity, encapsulation, maintainability. A lot of these are kind of abstract in a way, but they're also extremely important. When we talk about modularity, modularity is not modularity in the classic embedded sense where you build something to be reused. Modularity is created to make it a small and neater unit as possible, testable and verifiable, breaking the software into verifiable chunks that you can then put together and verify a bigger system. Verifiability comes from the traceability of the whole system, from the design through to the test cases. So although it's very difficult to put metrics on some of these terms, although some of them you can, like simplicity, you can put coding metrics on a function must not have more than so many knots, etc., and they can be part of your design. These are the basic architectural characteristics that you're going to design, we design into our SafeTCPIP modules. Then we drill that down into a detailed design, and we'll end up with, for each architectural element, we'll end up with a description of it, the complete function description, and indeed flowcharts all mapped back to requirements from the high-level design requirements. And we use IBM DAWs for doing requirements traceability, and indeed we put our test cases also in IBM DAWs, so we can trace those completely across. And so these references in the flowchart are to the specific requirements in the high-level specification. But what makes practically all safety standards work is traceability. You can do all the MC/DC testing you want, but if your requirements are not accurate, it's pointless. If the test cases are not complete, it's equally pointless. The goal in safety is to achieve complete traceability from what the engineers have specified as being the requirements of the system, which has to be done extremely well and diligently, through the design and implementation to the test cases, how the system is verified, checklists, actual test cases, integration tests. All these need to be mapped back so that every part of the implementation has something that tests it and it has something that specifies it. Every test case has something that specifies it. It's satisfying some part of the specification. And every part of the specification is satisfied by some part of the test case. And this is the essential part that allows you to maintain functional safety. It's one of the challenges when you're taking some off-the-shelf software that's maybe have been pre-certified, for example, in a very specific environment. Maintaining that traceability without all the artifacts and all the links, even changing a compiler, changing an endianness, a microcontroller, will change the behavior of a piece of software that needs to be traced back to specific test cases that can validate that it's still okay, and particular elements of the specification that say a requirement is to run in this environment or that environment. So without all this, it's very difficult to claim functional safety. And this is always, to me, traceability is the glue that really makes functional safety work. But none of that can be achieved without the specification and all the different elements being diligently implemented. There is no getting away from expertise on these systems. And in some ways, if you're looking at things like MCD testing, yes, you'll prove, you get people to do that who don't actually understand the overall project. And yes, you can prove that a function is valid in doing what it's supposed to do. But all that comes to naught if the context is not properly defined and the verification is not properly defined. These are far bigger deals. MC/DC should really be the icing on the cake, the last part of the jigsaw, not at the first consideration as to whether we're achieving functional safety or not. So once we've got the SafeTCPIP as a functionally safe design with the component, we then have to consider how it gets integrated with a particular software safety development. And again, 26262 is very good at specifying that, so I basically copied from 26262 how they manage this. On the right-hand side, we have the development of the vehicle, or whatever it is, the item under development under the 26262 standard, which could just as well be any other standard. And we first look at the assumptions it needs to make of a component to be integrated with it. And we match those assumptions with the assumptions made in developing the sale itself, the software sale. Then if the assumptions don't match, then we use the change management of the sale to try and make those match, or we modify the requirements, use the change management on the item development to refine them to be more accurately so they match those of the software sale. Once we have all our assumptions matching, then the output of the sale will be consistent with the assumptions of the item under development. We can integrate that into the target development environment and start using it as a safe piece of software within that vehicle. So this is all quite nicely defined in 26262, and it is a fairly straightforward model for how you take a piece of software that wasn't designed for the particular target system, work out, is the environment suitable, are the functions it carries out suitable? If they all match, if we can modify them to match, then we can integrate them with our safety development environment for that particular target. And away we go, we can continue with our item development. Once we have that integration into the target, one of the things that's really important to us is to be able to verify that when that is integrated, having made some modifications, maybe not having made any modifications, but maybe using a different compiler, a different CPU, a different endianness, different RTOS, things change. If things change, we need to make sure it's still behaving consistently in how it did before. And so what we have with the SafeTCPIP stack is a test framework that allows us to do remote procedure calls under our software under test, run all the test cases that we ran in development remotely to an item under test, and get feedback on how they performed and get the same functional and logical coverage in our test cases we used during the development of the safety element out of context, our SafeTCPIP stack. We run the same test cases on the target with the actual binary that will be used in the final system. And this is very powerful and a big advantage over taking a piece of pre-certified software and not knowing how it changes, not knowing the environment it was built in, not being able to replicate that. This is allowing you to put it into any environment and rerun the tests and prove that it behaves exactly the same in that environment. And if it doesn't, then of course you have to investigate why and go through a change management process, for which the traceability is absolutely key. And to support that whole process, we have our integrated test bench, which is basically a piece of software that you can write all your test cases in C#. We do this for all the AutoSAR test cases, for example, plus all the Open Alliance TC8 test cases. These have been all implemented under our test bench, plus all our standard test cases for doing coverage, for doing functional testing of our SafeTCPIP modules. We run this test bench, and through remote procedure calls, it logs the test cases, gets the results back, and gives you an output as to whether your software is behaving as it should in its new environment. One of the really important things to consider is there is a real need for flexibility when you're doing something like a network stack in a safety environment. Things change in networking. As I think everybody knows, I mean, there's always security issues are always occurring, even if you've got your functionality stable. To give you a little example of how things can change, one of the more popular ways of claiming stacks are not reliable is by referring to DNS poisoning, cache poisoning issues. And how this works is that people manage to load fraudulent DNS addresses into a particular piece of software and make it talk to a host that it wasn't intended to be talking to. This can only achieve a certain amount. If you have security and application level or something, you can't make any progress after that. But there is a weakness here. But the point is that this weakness doesn't exist because somebody wrote bad code. It exists because the original protocol specification for DNS didn't take this level of hacking into account. So now there's a protocol available called DNSSEC, and there's also other methods of mitigating against this attack, which is an improved level of DNS protocol. And if you implement this, then you can actually make sure that when you get a DNS entry, you can verify that it is actually a valid entry and you'll be talking to the host you intended to talk to. Now this is, I show this as a case of why, whatever you're doing in networking, you kind of always need to have the possibility of being able to upgrade, to do a patch because a security issue has been discovered, because something behaves differently. If you're in a completely closed system, as maybe an ECU system in a car might be completely closed, not have any external interfaces, then in that particular case, you might be able to close it and not need to have these concerns. But as soon as you have any external concern, things that change outside security considerations, you really need the flexibility to modify your modules. So this brings us on to how we actually build up our design of this stack and how we provide it to our customers. In each case, we have a master safety element out of context, our SafeTCPIP stack. And for each customer that orders it for a particular usage, we create a new instance of the whole stack. And by the whole stack, I mean not just the source code, but also the artifacts, the requirements, the test cases, and all the traceability. and build that so that each particular target, vehicle, airplane, functional safety equipment, has its own copy instance of the SAIL, so that if somebody raises a security issue or a function issue, each one can be independently maintained and independently verified in its new environment. And this is very important to achieve independence from the core stack, so that going forward, if we find an issue in the core stack, then of course we can inform everybody with an instance, this is an issue, do you want to take this into consideration and recommend the modification? But equally, if somebody comes and says, we have this particular problem we need to fix on this particular vehicle, then we can provide a fix that just works for that and maintain the traceability, because we have the full traceability from the specification through to the test cases, so that we can maintain this whole model. HCC have teamed up with Hitex. One of our focused target controllers for this software is the Infineon Oryx processor, for which Hitex have a Shield Buddy dev board. We've produced the Shield Buddy's Buddy, which is an extension board for the Shield Buddy, which allows you to connect an Ethernet port also to CAN ports and an SD card controller port. The most important is the Ethernet port, which you'll be able to obtain from HCC in the new year. And on this, you'll be able to download SafeTCPIP software and our test bench and show, run test cases and see how the SafeTCPIP stack works on an Infineon Oryx TC275 or 375 series Oryx processor. This kind of brings me to the end of the presentation, a very high-level summary of what SafeTCPIP is and how we develop it for use in safety environments. The real takeaways from this are, I think, firstly, you can make software components reusable and designed for safety, but it takes a lot of work. The SAIL model is excellent for achieving this. There's no simple way of solving this. No single activity ever guarantees quality or safety. It's a complete process. You have to have the processes in place to keep order. Without it, you can't make safety claims. And equally, the process has to be executed by diligent people who, to make this work and to make the requirements accurate and make the test cases accurate, requires people who have invested a lot of time understanding both the target software and how software should be developed to create a functionally safe component. This is not pre-certified software that you take not really knowing the environment it was tested in, the configuration it was tested in. This is designed to be integrated and verified on target exactly as it is, with all the artifacts available to you. And the last detail is this has to be expensive. Functional safety is never cheap. Anyone who claims it's cheap, simple, or easy is, in my view, not being fair. This is, it also denigrates the work of many, many engineers over the world. We've invested a lot of time trying to understand these things, developing ideas, improving things, and on a continuous process of improvement in understanding. And this is a very heavy-duty process, and should be. You want to make something functionally safe, it has to be done well, and it should not be easy. Thank you very much for listening. I hope this has given you something to think about. If you're interested in the subject of safety elements out of context, in particular software safety elements, I would recommend downloading the white paper from our HCC embedded website that goes into a lot more detail about the whole process of development and how it all links together and all the different components. Thank you for listening. May I wish you all well in these difficult times. Thank you. Goodbye.